Do you ever feel like you're in quicksand? Not literally, you would know if you were in literal quicksand, but does it feel like the work you've been charged to do is getting harder and harder and harder, maybe with less to show for it? Well, I want to share with you some specific warning signs that should sound an alarm that yes, you are in fact in quicksand. But more importantly, I want to devote a few minutes today to helping you escape. So let's talk about this topic of quicksand. A few years ago, our team was given the opportunity to try and help leaders improve their effectiveness. Here's what we observed. More and more leaders around the world were struggling. They just were having trouble getting the work done. So we said, what are the root causes? Let's go right in and try to start there. And we found some things that I'm assuming many of you can relate to. One of the culprits was distractions. 2,617 times a day, the average person clicks, swipes, likes, or does something on their phone. There's 432,000 hours of new YouTube content that gets uploaded every day. Distractions are a big deal. Complexity, busyness, interruptions. Here's what we learned about interruptions. If you have worked in an office environment or are doing so now, you're probably not surprised to know that the typical office worker is interrupted every 3 minutes. Some of you go, yeah, that's kind of the world that I'm familiar with. Well, what you may not know is that the psychologists tell us that on average, it takes 20 minutes for you to regain the level of focus and mental acuity that you had before you were interrupted. So let's play that out. It is actually feasible that you would go to work in the morning and leave having never recovered the level of focus and acuity that you had when you walked in the morning. So interruptions are huge. Now, as we began to research this, we found that the list was even broader than we thought. These elements that comprise this toxic mix that we've chosen to call quicksand. We heard leaders say things like fear, fatigue, even success could be impediments to their effectiveness. So what do you do with that? Most of those things sound normal and routine because we've become accustomed to them. They are our world that many of us live in. You may be wondering, so does that really mean that I'm in quicksand? Well, let me give you a few things to consider. How's the joy level? How's the fulfillment level? How's your effectiveness? Are the things you're doing today working the way they have worked historically? How about your passion? Is your work life-giving and soul-enriching? If any of those things have gone awry, then there's a really good chance you're in quicksand. So what do? If you're in quicksand, you only have 3 options. The first is to keep swimming, right? And that tends to be the way that most of us were raised, and it's our ethic. And when the going gets tough, the tough get going, and we're leaders, and we're just supposed to persevere, and we're supposed to persist, and we're supposed to set a good example and demonstrate a good work ethic. Yes, all of that is true. However, you've never seen a gold medal awarded for swimming in quicksand. You never do your best work if you're encumbered by the things that we talked about today and other things like them. It's also exhausting, which leads to the second alternative. If you find yourself in quicksand, you may just decide to quit, to give up, just to sink. And when you do, you die. You may not literally die, physically die, but your hopes and dreams can be extinguished in a moment. Well, option 1's not good. Option 2's not good. The only other option you and I have when we find ourselves in quicksand is to escape. We've got to get out of the quicksand. So I want to spend just a few minutes here sharing some ideas. We did a project on this, as I mentioned. It took several years to do the research and to reach our conclusions. We wrote about it in a book called Smart Leadership. But I want to give you the essence of what we learned and what we discovered. First, let me set your heart and mind to rest. Getting out of quicksand really has nothing to do with your skills. Yes, we all need skills. But the men and women that we found that get out and stay out, they make different choices. And so I want to share 4 what we call smart choices. Choices that you and I have the opportunity to make. They will require a little additional time, a little bit more energy, maybe a little more effort, but they yield a disproportionate return. So 4 quick smart choices. The first smart choice is to confront reality. Now, you know leaders who are unable or unwilling to confront reality. And there are all kind of reasons for that, and some of them are beyond my pay grade, right? You need to be a psychologist to figure that out. But here's what we know about these smart leaders. They want to be grounded in truth so that they can lead from a position of strength. Now, let me give you one idea, because this is harder to do than it sounds. Because after you make these choices, you have to activate them. You can say, I want to be grounded in reality, but what are you going to do? So here's an idea for you to consider. Find fresh eyes. Get others to help you maintain the proper perspective. These may be coaches, these may be mentors, these may be a peer group or a personal board of directors. Figure out who you can bring around you to help you confront reality. The second smart choice is to grow capacity. Now, this is controversial in some circles, because I've talked to leaders who would immediately respond, well, if I had capacity, I wouldn't be in quicksand. That capacity is ultimately my problem. Well, that's why it's one of the choices. And there are any number of strategies and tactics to grow your capacity. Just to stimulate your imagination, you can focus on your time. For every item you take off your calendar that is of marginal or little value, you've just created more space. You've created more capacity. Fitness and your physical energy and stamina. Now, I know we are finite beings, but most leaders I know can do something to increase their capacity as it relates to personal energy. Maybe it's about diet, maybe it's about exercise, maybe it's about sleep. You need to sort through that. Another way you can grow capacity is through your structure. Some of you are not structured properly to have any capacity. When I talk to leaders that say, oh, I've only got 11 or 12 or 15 or 20 direct reports, it's like, that doesn't sound like a structure that's going to create a lot of opportunity for capacity. And then one more, this is probably the most controversial thing we discovered in our research and wrote about in the book, and that is the idea of margin. Now, I've had a leader say to me point blank, I don't have time for a vacation. Well, I'm not talking about a vacation. I'm a fan of vacations, but that's not what I'm talking about. We're referring to margin as a leadership discipline. So my question for you is this: when do you have time set aside, scheduled on your calendar to reflect, to assess, and to create? Now, some leaders would say they don't. Well, that's tragic, because if you're the leader and you don't have time set aside to reflect, to assess, and to create, who's doing that critical work? Now, you may be asking, how much time do I need for that? I have no idea. I'll give you a couple things to consider, though. Harvard completed a 12-year study looking at the calendars of CEOs. Now, I'm not a CEO and I've not been a CEO, but I've known a lot of them. And it's a demanding job, no matter what size organization you're leading. On average, these CEOs, over a 12-year study, they spend 28% of their working hours alone. Now, somebody said to me, well, what do you think they're doing? Reflect, assess, and create. So, immediately, is it the answer 28%? No, the answer is not 20. That's an average of CEOs. But here's the other thing I will ask you to consider. The bigger your hopes, the bigger your dreams, the bigger the obstacles, the bigger the challenges, the more time you're going to need to be alone. You're going to need to cultivate the discipline of margin. It's a great strategy to grow your capacity. 2 more smart choices. The third is to fuel curiosity. For years, I've had folks ask me in one form or another the question, is there a leadership fountain of youth? And what I've always said is, I hope so, because I want to add value to my last breath. But what I can say now is a definitive yes. There is a leadership fountain of youth, and it's curiosity. So, again, any number of strategies and tactics you can employ. Here's one I would ask you to consider. Ask, don't tell. No, not emphatically, not legalistically, but here's the question. How many questions are you asking as a leader? Here's what I've learned. The more questions I ask, the better I lead. And that will fuel your curiosity. Fourth and finally, you've got to create change. You've got to choose to create change. I could probably identify some leaders who make those first three choices and they're awful as leaders and they have little impact in the world. It's because they're unwilling or unable to create change. And it's hard and it's challenging. I had a CEO tell me one day in front of the leadership team, "What you're describing sounds hard, all of it." And I said, "Well, you chose a hard profession. There are much easier ways to make a living than being a leader. But if you choose to be a leader, you've got to choose to create change." You know, too many leaders see change as a burden or an obstacle or a nuisance or something to be avoided at all costs. I would argue those leaders don't understand the essence of leadership, and the core responsibility that we have as leaders is to move people and teams to a preferred future. And here's what we know about that. Progress is always preceded by change. You've got to choose to create change. So I hope those warning signs will help you understand, are you really in quicksand? And those choices will help you know what to do to begin creating your escape plan. We've got one more free resource if you're interested. We created a behaviorally based assessment. It's free. All you got to do is click on the link below and it will help you probe a couple of levels deeper on each of those choices and give you some specific things that you may want to work on as you move forward. So here's my final word for you. Be smart.